Oh, yeah. Episode 110 with Kozy, Adam Kozy on this one. He's a hacker hunter, former FBI, U.S. Parkour director at USPK, and the head referee of World Chase Tag. And he is here to talk about, first of all, the organization USPK, give us some update on where they are, what they've been up to, and where they're headed, and how you guys can get involved. And share, some of his insight and his story on becoming a parkour practitioner, then governance participant, and more, and some of the topical conversations of the world we get into right at the end of the podcast. So I really like this one. Brilliant guy to converse with, and I hope you guys enjoy it very much. Here you are. Thank you for joining us, Adam Kozy, right? Am I getting all that correct?
Yeah, yeah. Cozy is usually what everyone goes with in the parkour community.
Okay.
Everyone has nicknames.
Yeah, I don't want to blow your A-list. We were just talking how you have this background in hacking and cyber network security, right? Um,
Yep, yep.
so, I mean, I don't know where you'd like to start, but ultimately, you're here to have a discussion about USPK, and I know
Sure.
primarily you wanted to, share some things and be really transparent because that's what the organization is about, and there's some great information and updates that are coming out for the parkour community to absorb. So
Yeah,
I definitely want to get into that, but I would like to just get, for anyone who doesn't know you, off the bat, just
sure.
kind of your background and then how you landed, former doing whatever kind of work I don't even know still completely for the FBI, now to directing the United States Parkour organization.
Sure. Yeah. So, um, let's see. Yeah, started. It's funny. The FBI and intelligence stuff and parkour actually were started around the same time. So, I moved to Washington D.C. Specifically to go to the FBI Academy in Quantico, and I got put in the cyber division. I think because I like hacked my high school's loudspeaker when I was like a kid, and they brought they know everything. They brought that stuff up during my like background check, and I
Wait,
was
they hacked
totally
your?
shocked. But
They know this? They tell me the story that they know because what did you hack at your high school?
my high school's loudspeaker system,
Oh, okay, the PA
it
system.
was like one of the first memes at the time. It was like a recording of Sean Connery just going, "You're the man now, dog," over and over again,
I do know that one.
and I yeah, my friends and I just thought that was absolutely hilarious, and so I hacked the loudspeaker and put it on a boombox and just had it on loop. And yeah, people, principal, everyone was running around the school. So I was told that it wasn't like put on my record that I did like community service as
Mm-hmm.
like a suspension type thing. But they still, like, when they do your background check, they definitely go back in time and start talking to all your teachers and people that knew you to kind of figure out what type of person you are, if you would be blackmailed, or if you're working for a foreign government or something like that. And so yeah, so they knew about that, and so I think that's the reason I got put in the cyber division, like because they definitely brought it up during my background check, and I was like, wow, you guys do your homework. So
Well, man, that is scary and sort of um, comforting, I guess. They're thorough, these
yeah, they're
FBI
thorough.
agents.
That's right. So yeah, so I'd moved out to DC, and I just had this you know like a fascination with parkour. I'd seen Casino Royale, I think, like so many folks, and seeing Sebastian Foucan and doing his thing, and just being like, wow, like that guy handily, like James Bond catches him in the movie, right? But you're like, he doesn't actually catch him. He kind of like outwits and breaks into that embassy. But I was just like, wow, like that guy moves like a true ninja,
Mm-hmm.
just like I'd never seen anything like it before. And so when I got to a bigger city like DC, I came from a small place in the Midwest, and was like, yeah, I want to see if that exists. Stumbled across the APK, American Parkour Gym, in downtown DC, and pretty much started taking classes right when I got in. And so those two things were kind of going simultaneously for over 10 years at this point. Um, so I worked for the FBI for a while, and then I started to do private sector cybersecurity. And yeah, so parkour had been growing, in the DC area, and I'd been a part of that. Sometimes teaching at the gym, Other times just kind of focusing on my own training. And, I guess I was part of that echelon of, you know, uh, dresseurs who basically like, yeah, I started this as a hobby. It was never, I didn't start in my teens. So I started, pretty much as a fully grown adult. Um, so I definitely was scared of some things. I think
Mm.
when you're a kid, you can just like throw your body in and just not worry about any of the impact or anything. But I was a little bit more cautious, so I probably didn't progress as quickly as I could have. But I just loved it. I fell in love with the community. I just thought that everyone was amazing, and I love this idea that it was very international from the beginning because I loved traveling, and that's what I wanted to do with a lot of my like government work, was to travel and kind of see all these different places. And parkour was actually really the outlet that actually got me out the door, more so than the FBI, because the FBI is a domestic intelligence agency. So I
Mm.
was mostly in the States for all of my bureau related stuff. But parkour was really what kind of got me out in the world. And yeah, I just think it's amazing because you have that immediate like connection with folks, and you can just plug into a community and have people show you around a different city, a different country, translate sometimes, and show you just kind of these amazing off the beaten path, not any of the touristy spots. They're taking you to rooftops and cool areas around the city. So that was really where I felt like I started falling in love with parkour. So
That is the place to fall in love with parkour, on a rooftop with some locals, I would say. Yeah. Or if
uh,
you, or just wherever, even by yourself, that's where you fall in love. You catch
yeah,
a lot of good sunsets, especially those early years. I feel like you really just, there's something really special about realizing, I don't know if it's still like this for people coming up, but when I think we were coming up, it was like, wow, it just felt like there was a whole lawless kind of land out there to explore for people willing to go access it.
yeah, and I think that was kind of the interesting part for me too. Was kind of like I had a background where I had to keep very squeaky clean to get into the FBI. But I always had that subversive,
Mm.
slightly anarchist side to me as well. I think all folks do that are in that. You just kind of you play by the rules to a certain extent, but you're also kind of like fascinated by the underground as a result. And so for me, that was very much parkour. It was, yeah, you're trespassing sometimes. That's definitely not allowed, but that's part of kind of the fun of it,
Yeah.
and just yeah, kind of yeah, figuring out how you can go different places and kind of push your limits. I think that's the other thing, was just really being able to um, step outside of your comfort zone. And the more that you do that, the more it becomes a habit. You feel like you can go other places because if you're too much in your comfort zone, you feel very boxed in. And I feel like parkour was always about the freedom and about pushing yourself out of the comfort zone. So everyone thinks of the physical side, but the mental side was, I think, really what you know absolutely made me fall in love with it, was just because it's like, well, this is a mental model. You can apply this to like literally anything in your life.
Mm.
And you see a lot of dresseurs kind of do that over time, where it starts physical with how to break something down, and then they start using it on larger problem sets within their life, and creating those kind of progressions to level themselves up.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I love that. Have you applied it to some of your cybersecurity in a way that's salient right now?
Yeah, trying to think of like a good example of that. It's really interesting because the cyber stuff was at odds for a while because it's very analytical, and with parkour you have to have a balance, right? If you're too analytical about it, I would sit there for a long time on a jump that I knew was at the outer limits of my capabilities, and I would just stare at it for the longest time, and then I'd go through the motions. I'd get my, everyone has their little pre-jump routine, right? When you're like
Yeah.
committing to something like that, you all have like your little ticks or whatever, and I have my own, and I
Yeah.
would I would do those over and over again, getting prepped for it, and then just analyze everything that could possibly go wrong in that scenario. And I was just like, I can't, so I had to learn to actually shut that part of it off. So in some ways,
Mm.
I felt like the cyber analytical stuff was detrimental, and I had to learn to balance the two.
Interesting. Yeah. Is it did you ever get in any trouble with your superiors or, clients, private clients?
Luckily, no, but it is funny training in DC because so much of it is, federal property. So there's
Mm.
definitely been a couple times where you've had you've had folks come out, with hands on weapons or something
Oh,
like
wow.
that, and that's definitely like folks that train in DC. If you're training downtown, like sometimes you just don't even realize it because it's block to block, and all of a sudden that one's like federal property, and you're like, wow. Okay, yep, no, no worries, backing away, not trying to actually break into this building. I have no idea what's in that building. It could
Mm.
be a secure facility. It could just be, a paperwork,
Hmm.
printing type thing. But at the same time, like they take that very seriously. So that is kind of one of those eye-opening things in DC. But luckily, nothing ever too bad happened, and that is definitely part of my, when I hear people talk about public parkour parks, I'm like, absolutely, because DC, that's definitely an issue, right? You can't even jump on some of the buildings without that. So,
Oh yeah, 100%. I've gotten in trouble ending up kind of similarly accidentally even on just the federal property here in Colorado. There's a whole different level of protocol for those kinds of whatever buildings and properties. Yeah, and I can't imagine what DC must be like because it's the ultimate here in the United States. But
yeah, and other countries don't have to deal with that as much, right? Like most places, you're not gonna like jump on something and have guns drawn on you, But that's definitely, I mean, that's a huge concern not only for if you're training in DC, but we've also talked about this, if you're BIPOC minority, in
mm,
training, it's definitely scary because like the US is way more aggressive with that. Instead of, coming out and talking to folks, people sometimes show up to a scene with like
absolutely.
hands-on weapons or tasers, and you're just like, whoa, that's not something you see many other places.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's a huge factor, especially in the United States. I would agree. Um, excuse me. So that kind of sums up your entry into parkour and things. And then you were obviously, how did you get involved more directly, I guess, and, ascend into now being the director of the USPK? And maybe for actually others, what is that organization? I don't know which question you want to answer first, but
Sure.
contextualizing that for the audience might be helpful because they might be hearing about USPK for the first time.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, maybe let's start with USPK, and then I'll talk about my entry because
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of chronological there. So USPK was started in 2017, 2018, kind of in the crossover between that, and a lot of that had to do with what was going on with the International Federation of Gymnastics, or FIG, announcing in I think 2016 that they were unilaterally going to take over parkour, and that was going to be a subdiscipline of gymnastics in the Olympics. And while, of course, I think there were plenty of folks in parkour that were kind of like, ooh, the Olympics, that could be interesting. Um, at large, the community was very much like very against gymnastics taking that over because we feel that we're, completely different philosophically, physically. Gymnastics is about, high level body awareness and control, but on very specific obstacles, right? Like it's been
Mm-hmm.
whittled down over 100 years to, pommel horse, rings, trampolines, very specific objects, versus parkour was basically like everything around you. And, everyone is saying hell no to like a 700-page rule book, which is what
Mm-hmm.
gymnastics currently has. So the
Yeah.
idea of gymnastics coming in and kind of like taking that over was very upsetting. And you had, I think, a pretty typical reaction from the parkour community, and the fact that everyone wanted to make fuck fig, um, t-shirts. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear on
Oh,
this. Maybe
you
I should have
can
asked
say whatever the
that.
fuck you want
Okay,
here on High Drop.
sweet. Well, shit. All right. um, so yeah. I mean, everyone was very gung ho about making the fuck fig t-shirts, but at the same time, it's just like, what is that? What is that going to do? And I think that is part of where USPK comes in. Is as a community, we kind of have to mature and get to that point of like, yeah, we can tell somebody to fuck off, but if they have millions, billions of dollars of money invested into their sport, and they felt like they could come in and do this, I think, because there wasn't any governing body internationally or nationally.
Mm.
And so they just thought this is for the taking. And I think a lot of people don't know that, this was prefaced by the International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, commissioning a study. They basically said, like, we don't know why young kids aren't watching the Olympics anymore. How do we get these kids watching the Olympics? And they commissioned a study. They got a bunch of scientists to go out and kind of figure this out. And it was like, action sports. That's what kids are watching: the X Games, skateboarding, snowboarding, all of these things. And sure, some of them, like snowboarding, had already kind of made the crossover into the Olympic space, with a lot of controversy there too, between skiing and snowboarding.
Because they did get adopted. Was it under the skiing? Skiing was the, gymnastics is to parkour as skiing was to snowboarding in this analogy. And I don't know where that landed actually, but
what was super controversial, I think most of the skiing community kind of had a very, I don't know, what's the word for it, kind of pretentious, look on things, and just, these snowboarders are just stoners that are going to come in and ruin this.
To this day, there's ski resorts that don't allow snowboarders at them. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. It's an old money type of thing. And so snowboarding was the new hip thing that they wanted to bring in, but it was like, okay, how are they going to do that? And so a lot of folks within snowboarding too were kind of torn about that, because they want the sport to grow. They want to be able to share the mountain. And I think that was a lot of the impetus for folks in the snowboarding community to get behind that, even if it was under skiing, was, hey, we want access. We want to be able to use the lifts. Like, nobody wants to hike up the mountain for, the 30-second joyride down. So I think that's how a lot of that began. And then, the IOC wanted these other action sports, and for gymnastics, they felt like the closest fit was parkour. And but the funny part is that study actually specifically said that they should reach out to these grassroots communities. They acknowledged that there were so many communities that were really underground and could use help being brought up to this next level and integrated into the older federations. And as we've seen, most of these older federations don't like to play that way. They're a little bit corrupt. They've existed for a while, and they're just like, that's mine. I have the money. I have the power. And now you have to do what I say. And so we're really trying to push back for that specific reason, because we've seen that happen with other action sports. So we really have no immediate reason to trust gymnastics right off the bat, because we've seen this before with other sports.
Can you tell me a little bit more about why and how government regulation, like why does it invariably, at least in our age, we have an opportunity, and USPK has an opportunity, and that's why, it's so cool that you guys are coming forward with trying to have this honest, really transparent discussion. That's one of the primary, I think, antidotes to what I'm about to kind of ask you about is how does corruption always seem to come about in governing bodies? And then, what is going to be the way that we prevent that now that we kind of have new tools and an awareness of that corruption, from the IOC? I mean, we all know, like it's been in the news, every year that there's anything to say about the Olympics now for at least a couple of decades. FIFA had the whole thing. Like, we all know that these governing bodies in sports, like, how is it that they, still get away with this stuff? And, what from where you're sitting, like, why is it so obvious? We know they're corrupt now, but there seems to be still very little we can do.
Yeah, I think a lot of it gets down to just, high level competitions. When you get to a certain point where you're trying to measure human athlete capability, that's part of the reason there's so many doping scandals, right? It's people are kind of trying to figure out what is the maximum level that humans can go to. And, that's involved drugs to a certain extent, kind of figuring out what the human body is capable of, and then backlash when there's a new thing. Even with swimming, there was the whole thing with Michael Phelps using one of those shark skin suits, and that providing an unfair advantage because you have plenty of countries, third world countries, that aren't able to afford that, and like that does make a difference. Point something of a second, but in swimming that matters. So there's that, and then the whole bidding process and what happens with FIFA and the Olympics to like be a host city. That whole process, everyone kind of knows is corrupt at this point. And I was in Rio de Janeiro for the 2016 Olympics. I happened to be living in Brazil at the time in the lead up to that. And yeah, I mean, nobody was surprised when like
Mhm.
a year after the Olympics, it was announced that the mayor of Rio had, a bunch of friends and fake construction companies setting up all of these things to get the Olympic contract. And then, paying these fake companies and just raking in the money himself. And it's just like, that is, tale as old as time at this point of somebody in those official governing positions dipping their hand in the cookie jar, trying to get some funding out of it, and lining their pockets or lining their friends' pockets. And so, it's kind of interesting because I think just as competition can kind of be human nature and to see what we're capable of as humans and as a species, but the corruption is also a part of that, right? And just the
Mhm.
fact that there's just a hard time for people to say no when that money is on the table. And so you need people that are in those positions to be, just completely um, the best moral compass you can possibly imagine. And I just think that like there's no test for that
Mhm.
nowadays when you get to those types of positions. And people say the same thing with politics too, that by the time you get to be a senator or a congressman or woman, that you're in somebody's pocket. You owe
Yeah,
somebody.
they don't
And
get
so
you. They
even if
don't
you
let
start
you up
off
to
with
that far that up the ladder until you're playing ball. It seems like.
right,
I mean, I don't know. I'm not in
right.
government, but
But I think that exists in sporting, events as well, and especially because people have learned that there's so much money in sports. I mean, like
mm,
the U.S. is the penultimate example of that. I mean, the NFL alone, it doesn't exist anywhere else. Soccer or football is like an easy one around the world because everyone kind of plays it, and all the countries
mhm.
get in on that. That's why you hear about FIFA, being super corrupt. It's like everyone's from all different types of governments are like in on that. But
Mm,
even the NFL just has so much money. And we saw during COVID, like how much like sports was some of the first stuff that was up and running with their
mhm.
own bubbles, right?
Yeah,
And
the
and that
UFC
just
never even
shows like the
stopped.
impact, right? It's crazy, crazy. We probably overvalue sports, but at the same time, that's I think that's part of the reason that corruption exists is that everyone sees that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I like how you point it towards. I mean, ultimately, it kind of points down to like we tend to value this thing, this category of sports so highly, and I guess we're just all
Yeah,
very curious about what people are capable of, and who knows like what
sure.
that says about us. Maybe we can talk to psychologists more about that later, but um,
Maybe. I'll bring it back to
yeah, yeah.
USPK just in the fact that the reason that USPK was set up was I'll admit a bit fear based, right? When the gymnastics associate or FIG announced
Mm,
all of this stuff, everyone was pretty panicked about it. But again, I think USPK sprang out of really good intentions, even if it was fear based. It was people saying, hey, we've talked about a governing body before, and a lot of people had. It was a lot of kind of closed door discussions or people talking in the community at different jams about it. But this was really the first time, several orgs that kind of had maybe been in competition before to some extent. You had, Apex, American Parkour, Parkour Generations, Parkour Visions, and Tempest all kind of coming together and saying like, hey, um, rather than be in competition about any franchises or gyms or equipment or anything, what we need to do is come together and create a governing body so that we at least have something set up so that the next time gymnastics comes back around, it exists. They can't just ignore us. They can't just say like, oh, well,
mm-hmm.
those parkour is just a bunch of hippies that like to jump on stuff. They're not organized. They don't know what they're doing.
Mm,
Instead, we have some sort of governing body to come back to and say like, yeah, like the community is rallied around this. We are trying to, um, you know, basically function under good governance, which is openness and transparency, so that the community knows what we're doing. They can weigh in on those things. It's democratic in nature. So that is kind of the impetus to create USPK. And then I think the number one thing I hear from people all the time is like, if they know of USPK, they're like, well, I heard about you guys when you first came out, and that was
mm.
it. I haven't really heard much since then. And yeah, we hear that. Like we get everyone's perspective on that. I think the behind the scenes stuff to create a governing body and create things like bylaws and a charter and just kind of like
Mm.
It's sort of your constitution of how USPK is supposed to run. Is it fair? How do people get elected to these positions? All of that stuff at the end of the day is probably not going to be super sexy to anyone who's training parkour, right? Unless you are, on in governance and, your job, or, to the political debates in high school or something like that. It's probably not going to be super fascinating. And a lot of it is extremely tedious. So
Mm.
to get a lot of that into shape took some time. And that's specifically because everyone that was working on USPK had a full-time gig doing something else within parkour, whether it's running companies or several gyms, or, running a certification course. All of the folks that have been involved in USPK so far are all extremely parkour centric, and all have their own full-time and sometimes several side hustles on top of that. And so everyone's time was super limited in the beginning. We're finally getting to a point where I feel like it's starting to roll a little bit more, and we're trying to be better about the marketing side of things so that people actually know what we're doing, so that we can uphold that transparency part of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, obviously the IOC has a few decades or centuries head start on you guys
Yeah,
in terms of,
absolutely.
this being this sort of supervillain that united some of the more influential parkour organizations to work as a team. And, you know, it's great that you guys are, now coming at us, and I'm happy that I have Hype Drop here to offer you a place to tell more people about what the updates that you have made and are making are now. And
Yeah, thank you. Thank you
yeah,
for
no,
having me.
well, thank you for doing what you're doing, because like you said, it ain't that sexy. And I I think I was on a committee for parkour competition in USPK for a little while, and yeah, it's certainly a really thankless and it's not hard, it's not an easy job to participate in that on
Yeah,
top of everything else you're trying to make happen in your life. There's nothing in it for these guys, especially in the beginning, except to, get parkour and the community at large a seat at the table at the very least, and having more say, and not being able to just get pushed around and bullied by some of these big established organizations. So thank you.
yeah, all of us. Yeah, of course. All of us are volunteer at this point, so nobody's getting paid for this, myself included. And this ends up being sometimes over a part-time job. I think I've definitely put in full-time hours for quite a few weeks at this point. But it's one of those things where I realize that the window that we have to make an impact and to do this is super small,
Mm.
because COVID, to be honest, bought us a little bit of additional time, because gymnastics, they couldn't do anything in the competition space at all. Nobody really could, including ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gave us a little bit more time to be organized. But gymnastics has started to come back around. They started to ask for different athletes for things like the World Games, which is coming up in Birmingham in July. They asked for several female athletes. And we do talk to gymnastics, to be fully transparent. We've tried to keep that door open for communication, just so we know kind of what they're up to, what their interests are, and maybe where things are headed next. But I've also had a very frank discussion with, one of the kind of senior execs at USAG, saying, what if parkour isn't ready for the Olympics? Because we feel that, and I would say that we're trying to represent the community here. And so if folks feel differently, please reach out to us. But we get the sense that even within parkour competitions, even though they've been around for a while, we're still kind of finding that happy medium. And what do parkour competitions look like, and what would that look like for the Olympics? And there's speed, skill, style, which sport parkour and several others, I think, really, Apex had its own circuit for a bit, and we're really kind of pioneering in this space. And so those are kind of the tried and true formats, but we do want to encourage like maximum flexibility and creativity with that stuff. So even as we start to look at creating more of a national circuit, we want people to experiment with different formats. We'd love to have Chase Tag be a part of that. And in fact, we've partnered with World Chase Tag, and try and provide some support or insurance for this next event that's coming up. But yeah, we'd love for that to be a part of it. If we, if gyms want to start doing parkour speed relays to make it more team based. I think that's a phenomenal idea. We'd love to see some speed courses that have ascent and descent. There was actually a really interesting course in Tokyo that was maybe a month or two ago, and I'm not actually sure if that was Japanese gymnastics sponsored or not, but it was pretty interesting because it did have an up down portion where you had to do some pretty quick 180s and climb ups, and then do a big drop and roll afterwards to kind of make that part of the course. So we do want to see that sort of creativity play out, because we just feel that we haven't found the sweet spot. And you'll hear me compare it to skateboarding all the time, because skateboarding has very recently come into the Olympics, this last year. But skating has had almost 40 years to develop. And I think that we're kind of on more of a 10 to 15 year point where, if we were to compare this to where skating is right now, we're kind of in like the late 80s, early 90s, when, skating started to be a little bit more commercialized. Mm-hmm. You had obviously Tony Hawk's generation bringing a lot of like business. They were savvy entrepreneurs, creating their own skate brands, bringing more money into the sport, and then creating those different kind of competition formats that became the X Games. And you had a bunch of those different formats like Big Trick or doubles, or and some of those didn't stick around. They mm-hmm. were in X Games for a couple of years, and then they realized either it doesn't televise well or it just wasn't that representative of skating, and so they nixed it later. And I think we're about to enter that phase, especially for competitions at this point.
What are the risks of getting into the Olympics? I mean, so for the people that are wondering, like, hey, so why does this matter for me? Like, what kind of what are the things that might happen if we get into the Olympics too early, or without unification, or without agreeing on competition formats, for example, or, if FIG just kind of muscles us around, what are these potential worst case scenarios? And then we can talk about, the best case scenarios.
Sure. So, I would just say that the risk is basically the fact that it can just water down the sport overall. So I think people have even seen some of the pseudo kind of parkour gymnastics competitions that have been put on. They do it via a vehicle called FISE or FISE. And that has a bunch of BMX and skateboarding and other types of things. And so we've seen some of those speed competitions come out, and there's still like some great parkour athletes, especially in Europe, that were participating in those. But we felt like it wasn't super representative of parkour. It essentially was just like a speed run across a couple railings. There were a couple vaults in there, and that was pretty much it. And it just didn't have much variety and wasn't that exciting to watch. And if like it's your sport, like I do parkour, right? Like, and I wasn't excited watching that. And so if you're not excited watching your own sport, or like, even if the people like kind of getting hyped up to like cheer for them, something's off. And I feel like that is the danger of kind of letting gymnastics just kind of come in and do this, as well as because it's gymnastics and they have this professional athlete pipeline that goes all the way down to like 3 years old. You get kids in gymnastics early, they start talent scouting, and then these folks have their peak career from like 16 to 22 or something like that, and then they are kind of like throwaway athletes after that. I just don't think that's what we want to see for parkour. We want to see parkour have a longevity. We want to see it keep that creativity and not force kids to not play anymore. We're having those discussions about competitions right now, like how young is too young for youth leagues, because you still want kids to be kids and have fun and enjoy movement, rather than making it all about like, let's put you in a pipeline so that you're in the Olympics 6 years from now.
Yeah, no, I see that as a big thing, because they're absolutely going to try to map on what's been working with them for the last couple of decades, and just try to make a square peg fit into that round hole in some way. And it'll probably be a weird amalgamation of the two if we, let them do what, have their way. So then on the flip side of that, what is the ideal, what the the mission of USPK, and how can we affect the opposite? The best case scenario where that you can see.
Sure. So USPK's mission is the healthy growth and development of parkour within the US. And we believe that there's a lot of different avenues to get there. And the Olympics could factor in later, but that's definitely not our end all be all.
Mm.
And even then, the Olympics, in order to be an Olympic sport, you do basically have to start creating a 700-page rule book. And I just don't think that. I think even though the money is tempting, because people are like, yes, in the US specifically, there's no Ministry of Sport. So like parkour is recognized in the UK as a sport because there's a UK Ministry of Sport that said, yep, parkour is a sport. The US doesn't have that. It's all about who has the biggest balls in the room and the most money, and whoever gets the magic US Olympic Committee wand that usually comes with $1 million or more. So while that's tempting to immediately try and go after that, I think the community at large would agree that we're probably not ready for that, because we would water it down ourselves at this point. We need to kind of figure out what that pathway looks like. And for USPK, I think a lot of what we like to focus on is, enriching the community that exists. You'll hear me talk a lot about trying to create a parkour economy, which is kind of a self-sustaining economy, that there's an ecosystem where everyone is able to, there's multiple job career paths that aren't just being a professional athlete sponsored by Red Bull, because that's kind of what everyone's dream has been, right? Everyone wants to get to Dom Tomato's level of like, yep, I can, Red Bull's paying me X amount to do this, or I get paid by brands to put out content on Instagram. And while that's great, even the athletes that, I've trained and talked to Dom before, I've talked to all of those athletes that do that. And even they're kind of like, yeah, there's times where it just sucks to make content. And so we do want to make sure that there's other pathways. And one of those, of course, is a professional athlete pathway where you're doing competitions, you're getting money for those, and you can actually make more of a at least part-time or full-time living off of parkour. Then we also want to create a whole bunch of other things, and that's where USPK I think comes into play. Is there's a lot of folks in our generation who maybe had those dreams of like making it pro and doing all that stuff, but now have kind of realized like, hey, I'm probably not at my peak anymore. I need to take good care of my body. I want to keep training parkour, but I want to still be involved in the sport and kind of set up the next generation. And so the natural progression has always been to go like coach, and then after coach going to, maybe owning a gym, or, running a certification or something like that. And so those are all great formats to kind of take. But we also want to offer, kind of the governance side of things, where you're helping to run competitions, you're helping to, create that economy and pump up, kind of parkour businesses. That's what skating did. They all kind of supported each other via their magazines and their different brands. I just want to see more of the community kind of uplift each other, because I feel like, depending on what Facebook groups or what forums are in, you can see kind of some negativity sometimes, where people are kind of ragging on each other or calling somebody out for different things. And it's just like, we need to get past that, right? Like we're in this mode where if we don't start working together and really uplifting each other all at the same time, then it makes gymnastics, take over even easier. And so that's part of the mission of USPK, is to kind of unite the community, make that parkour economy larger, bring some money into the sport, put some dotted lines, I would say, around what competition and safety and like certifications look like. Those are typically the things that national governing bodies do. And I would, also just say that even though we've talked a lot of shit about gymnastics and corrupt governance organizations and stuff like that, governance isn't all bad, right? Like it's the reason that life a lot of times can function the way it does, especially in the US. Like you can complain about government, but at the end of the day, somebody's coming around, picking up your trash, you flip the light and the electricity works. All of that usually has something to do with some form of governance and keeping a semblance of normalcy headed in the right direction. And so that's kind of the answer for parkour as well. And we've had some really good reach outs from different national governing bodies that aren't gymnastics that are just kind of willing to lend a hand and say like, hey, I get it, you guys are overwhelmed, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on right now. They're sharing things like their strategic plans, their budgets, all of these things, just lending a helping hand, not expecting anything in return, because their sport doesn't even relate, but it's actually a good community to kind of get into to see what the next steps could be for parkour. And so that's kind of where USPK is trying to be that go-between, where we understand what other national governing bodies are doing and trying to get parkour to that next level. Because I think a lot of folks have just felt that parkour has always kind of been stalled. Why aren't we at that skating level? Why don't we have all the Tony Hawk video games, et cetera? And I think a lot of that is just time, time and maturation of the community, and then uniting and uplifting each other.
Well said. Did you want to get into some of the more specific announcements? I know that we had talked a little bit about, just some of the things that you guys are currently up to that maybe people want to be privy to. Or is there anything else
Sure.
on your mind before we get into that?
No, we can go ahead and get into that. I think, I already alluded to the idea of a national competition happening. And a lot of that was just, reaching out to a lot of the different existing parkour leagues that have already kind of been forming. There was Justin Taylor's West Coast Parkour Championship, and a lot of people involved in that, and that's been smoothly running for like 5 years at this point. So they've done some incredible work kind of carving out that space. Obviously, Sport Parkour has done that as well. There's the Midwest Parkour League that's been around for a bit. And so reaching out to a lot of these folks and just kind of discussing what it would look like to start feeding into something else. Because previously you could just win one of those leagues and then it didn't really go anywhere after that. So we wanted to feed into more of kind of a pyramid structure. And so, okay, yeah, once you win that regional league, let's take it somewhere else. And so the idea is to create a national competition sometime at the end of Q3 or early Q4 this year, and have some of those leagues feed into that. And at the same time, uplift a lot of the other regions that are just kind of starting out with their different circuits. So that would include, the potentially the Southeast, Northeast. There's been talk about a South Central one. And then, of course, a Frontier West, which is kind of headquartered in Colorado currently. So it's going to be messy this first year, and we're fully aware that it might be a little bit of a shit show. So I want to temper everyone's expectations a bit. It's not going to be magical. It's not going to be the immediate Red Bull that everyone's probably hoping it will be. But that's because there hasn't really been a bona fide system set up to do competitions and speed, skill, style, feeding into much larger. How do you do regionals? How does that filter down to the local level? How do you make the brackets work? How do you make the scoring work? And so we're starting to piece all of those different bits together. And there also hasn't really been like a parkour season. And for kids, especially starting off in parkour, I think it's easy for us in the older generation to just think, well, we do parkour year round, but kids, are in different sports. And, in order to convince parents to like keep their kids in parkour, I think a lot of the time they want to see that parkour is leading somewhere. So competitions is a great way to do that, because they get to see how good their kid is. They get to see how they stack up. They get to travel around to different regions and continue competing. And there's kind of a system to like level up and progress. And so we're kind of working on, congregating all of those different pieces together so that it can feed into a national competition. And and then we just hope that next year it gets even better. There's a little bit more of kind of what we would call like a dedicated competition season. And then the idea is that people still train parkour year round because it's what we love. And that's the whole point. You can do it anywhere.
When is your season in your head? I got a few months in my mind. I'm like, but I'm curious what you think what's the parkour season if we have to pick one?
Oh man, that's a really tough one. Right now, it has ranged from all the way. I think West Coast started in January and is starting to wrap up, and then I
Hmm.
think like Northeast hasn't even like started yet.
Oh
So
wow.
right now, it is all over the place. If I if I had to pick one, it's tough because we're still trying to figure out. Right now, the easiest thing is to do the competitions in the gyms.
Hmm.
Usually, because they have the insurance, it's a little bit easier to use the space. But I know that a lot of us would love to see either hybrid arenas where you're able to kind of use outdoor features but put up some scaffolding and add on to it to make it kind of a really good course, or even potentially someday have those big kind of more Ninja Warrior arena type setups. But the amount of setup, the amount of cost that is involved in that is massive. So we would need to be taking a lot of sponsorship money, and I think that we want to start small and grow this in the right way. So to that end, maybe kind of winter into spring makes a little bit more sense, just because you can still do that indoors, and you can kind of be training throughout the winter to get to that point. And then we also want to still encourage the maximum amount of people to train outdoors in the summer when the weather's nice.
Hmm.
um, so another determining factor is too, I think, that the World Chase Tag stuff, we're trying to sync with them for probably not this year, but maybe next year. And they typically run their US event, which we're hoping to run in concert at some point, is usually in July, August, somewhere around there. So if we can
Hmm.
have it synced up to that point, eventually, maybe that's the goal, but we'll see.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There's always a lot of competitions in North America, at least in that August, September area. For whatever reason, that's when like the
Yeah,
Apex competition happened. That's when Origins holds theirs. Typically, they're going to do theirs again this year, it sounds like. And
yeah,
I don't know, but I like that. It's a it's a hot ticket, hopefully.
hopefully.
What are some of the contention points around like you guys, whether you're trying to solve right now, that maybe the feed that you're looking for feedback from the community on, if any? We talked just barely about one. I can't remember what it just was, but just about whether or not we're ready for starting to etch these things. I mean, I don't know how permanent they even are. Let's say a format gets into the
Sure.
Olympics, or it gets into how malleable are our competition formats, and how do you protect them from getting too rigid? And
Yeah,
that's a different
ours
question,
are
but I'm curious about both.
ours are going to be extremely malleable and as much as possible, because again, I think that at the beginning we're still really at the beginning of parkour, if you
Mm.
think about it, and the lifespan of what we hope parkour becomes to the larger public. um, so I think that in order to not stifle it and to keep that creativity and keep people pushing new tricks. I love seeing Bob Reese's, breakdowns of how he's like creating kind of, he's just like, well, I wanted to try this, but then I tried this. And he kind of breaks you down his mental process to do that. I think we need a lot of that at this point, because it shows that like we're still inventing the new sides of this sport,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to leave maximum creativity to do that. And so I think the governance side of things is more about safety standards, so that people
Mm.
can see that we're being safe. And insurance, unfortunately, is like one of those necessary evils in the States. I've learned way more about insurance than I ever hoped to in this job. It's not my favorite part of it, but it's very necessary because all the gyms want the cheapest insurance. And so we're looking at ways that we can kind of create more of a risk protection group that people fall under, so that it changes the industry's perspective. Because right now, I can guarantee you that most insurance companies, it's some middle-aged white guy sitting at a desk that's an underwriter that is looking at risk analysis, and he's running the formula, just going like, oh my God, has no idea what the maybe what parkour is, Googles it and just sees one of those people are awesome videos, and it's just people all doing roof gaps and just the craziest highest level parkour stuff that you can think of,
Mm-hmm.
and then just goes nope. They like tick a box and just say like, that's the most dangerous shit I've ever seen, and they give us the highest premiums.
Oh my God.
um, and that's
That's hilarious.
understandable, but
Yeah, I love how
but
that's how like it looks. I mean, obviously it works against us in many ways, but also I think it's hilarious that at face value, it is one of the most insane things you'd ever see a human being do, you know.
yeah, I think that's also a big thing, you're talking about kind of contentious is like we also have to take a step back with USPK and say like we want to serve the existing community as best as we possibly can and take feedback from everyone, create competitions that people enjoy, allow for that maximum creativity. But we also have to take a step back and project what parkour is to the outer world, because I think we can get very community centric and kind of stay in our own little bubble. And we also need to be that first kind of introduction for a lot of people that are interested in parkour. And for the new generation, that's kids are interested because they see it on YouTube and they see the crazy shit and go like, yes, I want to do that. That looks awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but from a parent's perspective, they're looking at it going like, okay, where can I safely teach my kid this? And so they want to know, and that's what we want to start reflecting on our website a bit more as we kind of update it, is that like parkour is actually super safe. We want to prove to insurance companies that the injury rates are actually consistently much lower than soccer or football. It's a non-contact sport. We teach from pretty much day one, responsibility, individualistic responsibility. Nobody's going to make you do that jump, right?
Mm-hmm.
You decide at the end of the day. And so you have to know your capabilities to get to that point.
Yeah. That is why it's so funny,
So
because obviously it looks like it's probably the most dangerous thing, but it's because it's one of the safest things that you can get it to look so dangerous. Because if it
yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
so within your control, you wouldn't be able to take risks like that without being completely insane. And there's just not that many insane people in the world for us to
exactly.
for us
Yeah,
to
I
all be
think I
doing
think
that.
that's maybe we need to do more spotlights of like everyday parkour people for the rest of the world, of just like how these people are very normal. They're not like at work just like flipping tables and stuff like that. Like they're very like mild mannered in their day activities, but then they can go and do these things because they've drilled that, they've practiced that mental mindset, they've practiced the physical skills.
Mm.
But to show that's why I think those breakdowns are really important. And I still think it's important to, Jimmy the Giant is talking about save your clips and showing your progression videos. I do. I think all of those are super important. Show the next generation who's coming up how they can get into this and how they can get to that level, that there is kind of that pathway, not in the gymnastics sense of like we're going to drill this into you and you're going to do this from free and go to the Olympics, but more of a like here's how you can start to control your body and start to level those things up. And it is in a very safe way, and parents feel good about like getting their kids into that. And I think the other really unique thing about parkour that we need to leverage, especially within the sporting world, is the fact that we're the most accessible sport on the planet. And it was actually the head of USA Skateboarding that said that to me. As
Mm.
I joked about there not being enough money in parkour and how skateboarding has all this merchandising and all of that stuff. And, that we call it parkour, as a joke. And he was just like, yeah, man, I totally get that. But at the same time, you guys have the most accessible sport in the world. Like you don't need a board. You barely even need shoes. You can
Yeah,
train barefoot if you want. He's like, that is powerful. And the other thing is that you can transition that to other sports. And so
absolutely.
I've had folks from USA Youth Soccer come up and talk about like, yeah, like we should do a crossover at some point where we train the kids how to fall, because that happens all the time in soccer. And kids, when you're playing soccer, you don't really learn how to fall correctly. You're just like go after the ball, dribble, shoot, touch drills, all of those different types of things. But very rarely are they learning how to fall, disperse that momentum, and get back up and run. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was like, yeah, that's where we want to be, is kind of the hybrid that could lead into other sports. So that, yeah, if your kid is in parkour and you still go and do soccer season after kind of the competition for parkour season is over, you're taking those skills with you and you're going to keep coming back to parkour because it's what you love. So
Yeah, it is. I've always thought of it as like it's a very fundamental. I think of it. My head always goes to the Matrix,
yes.
and then where he's like downloading all the files, and it's like, oh, he's learning jujitsu and he's learning whatever. And I'm like, parkour should be like right up there at the top of the list of
It should
programs
be.
because it does have the most broad reaching applications, other than strict combat.
100%.
So I've always thought that, yeah, it's definitely one of the most
Yeah.
accessible and crossover rich things to train in.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's some of the future too. Some of the folks, that are part of USPK, have really looked at getting into schools, and I think that like APK is doing a super good job of that. They've put 20,000 kids, I think, at this point through a public school parkour program, and that's taught in middle school. So instead of doing dodgeball, they're doing parkour. They have some basic precision and vault box setups, and it's like, yeah, that's the future. Parkour could absolutely be in schools, and I think that like it's, we could be a generation or two out from like everyone having at least some basic parkour skills. And that's pretty radical to like think about. If you think about like what everyone's just in control of their body a little bit more, and your vision changes. That's one of the cool things about parkour is you start looking at walls differently. You look at, your surroundings. For me, it was like me in my suit going to the FBI headquarters in downtown DC, being completely normal on the metro, but like looking and just being like, I could do that, and then tack off of that, and then do that. I'm like tracing my route. How would I get to work the most efficiently if I actually had to just run it? And I think that's like having an entire generation of that would just be like ridiculous. Like that would be so cool to see someday.
Yeah, they'd have to remake a bunch of prisons and whatever else. I don't know. I'm just trying to think.
Wasn't that a thing for a bit? Wasn't there a group in Seattle that was like doing like penetration testing for prisons?
I hope so. I've always wanted to do that. That's a dream. I think the store guys just announced that they had somebody that was going to hook them up to do something like that as well. And yeah, that is just like a dream come true. There was
That's
like
epic.
an old TV show that was like, there was two dudes that they didn't know parkour, but they would practice breaking into places. But it takes a lot more skills than just jumping. Jumping can get you into a lot of really interesting places. And though if you don't know how to pick a lock or do probably some stuff that you have known to do.
Maybe that's my crossover calling at some point when I retire from USPK.
You got actually maybe a bigger map of like, okay, these are like the Batman skills, you might say. These are like everything that Bruce Wayne had to learn. He had to learn some combat. He had to learn how to fly around and jump through things. And he also, from what I understand, I'm not actually the biggest nerd. I sound like it, so I'm drawing all these comic analogies.
I'm a huge nerd.
I am a nerd, but I'm mostly a nerd about parkour. I'm not really. I might be more of a nerd than I even know about Batman. But he's apparently a really good hacker. From what I understand through the novels and through the movies and graphic novels. So you got a pretty good Bruce Wayne set going for yourself, it sounds like. I might have to get more skills on the computer. What?
That's where I like got into it. I think that's a lot of folks' reasons for getting into parkour. Is like a lot of us grew up on comics and superheroes and stuff like that. And like when people are like, yeah, why would you want to join the FBI? There's so many rules and you have to keep squeaky clean. And I was like, yeah, I always had this weird delusion that I could like save the world, So I was like, that's how you can learn some of those skills to do those sorts of things. And so it's just been kind of trying to consistently find those things and level up where possible. And now it is kind of interesting because it's, your version of that changes as you mature as an adult, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to do it as Batman probably, but if I could change the world by getting every single kid to have basic parkour skills and teach some of this other stuff and hopefully prevent cyber war from breaking out all across the world, then like great, like that's as close to Batman as you can probably get in real life. So
what are some of the tools that you see available in the future to make governance better happen better for everyone? And is there anything that USPK is doing like drastically different that you can see that's really innovative? You've pointed to skateboarding. There's maybe some other success examples you can point to, but I'm curious to see if there's anything that is just like, here's the new level that everyone's neglecting, that we're doing differently or that we
Sure.
want to do in the future?
I mean, I'll use this opportunity to say to do my pitch on the fact that we need help, we need
Mm.
volunteers, we need folks that want to come on, and we do have to have more paid positions over the next year to make sure that people are getting paid for their work. I know the community has had a rough time with volunteer work over the years. But the idea is basically the more people that we have on board to do this sort of things, we can run those competitions better. We can get into public advocacy spaces where we talk to state and local level governments on behalf of the community. Because I think if you want a public parkour park, right, it's pretty tough to go in there as yourself right
Mm-hmm.
now. Even unless you have a really solid business plan, you know somebody on city council maybe to go in and just say like, hey, we deserve a parkour park. Let's allocate some public funding to this. When you come in with a national governing body behind you, it's a lot easier because they can look at the site, they can see what parkour is, they can understand, okay, there's somebody larger backing you that has their ducks in a row,
Mm.
and it adds that kind of legitimacy to what you're trying to do. And I think that we're going to see that pay dividends, with public parkour parks, with sponsorships. We're also looking at creating more of a sponsorship pipeline for athletes for competitions. And we see that as a really unique opportunity because parkour as a sport, I think people take really good care of their bodies. So we'd love to see more healthy brands in there, staying away from the alcohol, cigarettes, energy drinks, maybe, and going more the route of healthy foods, things that take care of yourself, and pump some of those up for healthy living. So we'd love to see that. And then the other thing we're doing is we are trying to be as community focused as possible. So when you're hearing us talk about the competitions, I'm sure a lot of folks are like, well, how are you guys deciding that? And what gives
Mm.
you the right to decide that? Well, good governance is basically trying to create those open democratic platforms. And so part of that means creating a competition committee that has an athlete advisory committee, a judging committee. And we're trying to get as many folks that have been involved in this, that have the experience, the folks that felt like maybe they've been slighted by other competitions, like Red Bull. I know a lot of people flag on the judging there, to get those folks in the door and say like, hey, if you're not happy with the results and you kind of don't like that, come join this committee. It's open. You don't necessarily need to be, like running the comp yourself, but like help us decide what those rule sets are, what's fair going forwards, what is representative of parkour. And so we're trying to create those open doors and those types of committees so that people feel heard, and that they can have a direct impact on what the future of the sport looks like. And that's something that's very different. I think that gymnastics is not going to do that. I think they're tried and true method in other countries, and we're still new in the process within the US, but within other countries, it's been basically to get parkour people in the door, ask them, this information, kind of suck them dry of the information. And if they start to disagree, they'll show them the door, and then they'll get in the next yes man, yes person, that will just agree to whatever they're saying. And so we're going about that completely differently because we're trying to build that into the org early on so that people have that voice and again, can make that impact.
Dope. Is there a place that, if they want to get involved right now, let's say a listener wants to volunteer, do they go to uspk.org, or where do you direct people that want to get involved? And, is there anything else that you want to share on terms of like how people can get involved and what benefits are, or the reasons why they might want to get involved?
Sure. So yeah, uspk.org is definitely the spot. We are in the middle of upgrading our website with a whole bunch of new stuff that basically encompasses kind of our direction, our strategic plan over the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, et cetera. So a lot of that is getting updated. So if you see the site now, it's going to look kind of outdated. But within the next couple months, that will be launching. And we're also launching a bunch of new membership tiers and showing you exactly what kind of benefits you get for those. So one that we're really excited about is for an individual USPK membership. As like a pro athlete, if you sign on, just because you want to compete. You don't have to be top tier. Anyone can sign on to this membership tier, but that's basically insurance for anywhere you do parkour, not just a gym. But if you train outside and you break your arm, you basically would just contact our partner, and it's a super simple process you can do on an app, or with a phone call. And that's pretty revolutionary, because I don't think that that's really existed before. And I know that a lot of people that do parkour are probably just either oblivious or blissfully, ignorant and taking on the risk of that comes with potential injuries. And in the States, that's a big deal, because sometimes your medical stuff with your job, your insurance may not cover it. So we're launching a whole bunch of that stuff. I will also go ahead and send you, Brandon, a link maybe to put on there. It's just kind of our volunteer Google form that people can fill out, and they kind of enter those Batman skill sets that we're kind of looking for. So if you're a webmaster or you've had governance experience, there's a whole section where you can kind of drop in what your background is in. And, you don't have to have any of that stuff. If you're just literally wanting to help parkour get to that next level, we're looking for everyone at this point. We need all the help we can get on marketing, social media, people volunteering at the events, helping with setup, and, just spreading the good word, I'd say, at this point too.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the description for people. I love it, man. It's like the Avengers team assembling right now for
assemble. Yeah, it's me with a conch shell somewhere in the background, just screaming that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that insurance is an interesting one. I definitely did a large chunk of my training completely uninsured. And I'm lucky to have made it through that without any catastrophic injury. I don't know how many others there are out there like me, but I'm assuming many, many young men and women. So.
Too many, yeah, myself included. So we're going to try and make that easier for both individual athletes, and then, as I mentioned, I think for gyms as well. If we can kind of get under this umbrella risk protection group, hopefully it makes it cheaper for everyone in the long run, and we can start to change the insurance industry's approach to it. And get to the point where they just see that, okay, we don't need to charge everyone this high premium, because gym after gym is reporting very few injuries. And when they do happen, they're, very well taken care of. There's a whole process to report that. There's safety measures in place, et cetera. So that's the benefit of getting more organized, I would say, as a community.
I'll be especially excited to see parkour parks start popping up here in the United States. I know it's been a weird landscape for people to get some of that stuff done, just because the US is just different than anywhere else. And,
yes. Yeah.
But I'm very excited to see when those things start popping up in certain places, what they're going to start to look like, how people are going to use them, how the format and like the way they're constructed is going to be different. It'll be very interesting, because we have like generations of architecture and purpose-built parkour things, and they always look a little different each generation.
Yeah, and I think that's progressing at a good pace. I'd also say, if anyone's listening to this and you're, playground manufacturers, your equipment manufacturers, definitely, drop me a line at director@uspk.org, just because we're looking into that. How do we get that in more places? Because I think there's like something like 5 playground equipment manufacturers that have kind of a monopoly on most of the playgrounds you see in the States at this point.
There's always a monopoly.
There's always a monopoly.
We're in the age of like dissolving monopolies. I feel like that's part of like the story of our generation. Yeah, we're gonna like build some out too, but that's why decentralization has become such a big theme. Blockchain and all that. Yeah, I think is because we're starting to like want to reset the ladder and make things fairer again for people. It's clearly not working.
Please, yeah. It is. It's out of control with big tech and all that good stuff. But yeah, getting to that point where we can at least have a ready packet for people that want to build parkour parks, because it is different state by state. That's kind of the difficulty with running a U.S. governance body, is like every state has a different law, and it's always some weird, like side addendum or something like that you're like, what the fuck is this?
Damn. Yeah, I always forget that, but yeah, the United States is a little bit more like doing a governance body for the EU than it is like any individual country, probably.
Yeah.
Just because it's got so many little sectors and little sub nations almost.
Yeah,
All right, that's amazing. Thank you, sir, very much for being so generous with your time and, on and
sure.
off air here and helping to fight this fight and be the person that you are doing USPK things and everything else you do.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, man. I'm really glad to be on the podcast, and huge fan of what you're doing over here as well.
I appreciate it. Thanks, man. Bonus question. This is a bonus question just
Yes.
purely because, you know, I'm aware that you have a knowledge base that is particularly topical these days with the war going on in Ukraine. You made a
Mhm.
very enlightening post recently. I'm just curious if you want to give people again, maybe not that exact post, but just like what are your current thoughts on the whole global conflict? Because I think that, again, it's just rare that we hear from somebody who understands what we love and also bigger, more important topics in some ways. And that
Sure.
can, bring some of that context to us. I think it's part of the conversation that we so rarely have inside the community sometimes because none of us know what the hell we're talking about, but you do
Sure.
know a little bit.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I'm happy to dive into that. That's yeah. So the post I made was specifically about what Ukraine is going through right now and seeing this kind of build up because cyber at this point is kind of the pretext to most traditional warfare. So
Mm.
you'll see preparations for on the ground operations, months in advance at this point, and it's just kind of one of those things of you can anticipate that, and then what we're also seeing is I think Ukraine has done an excellent job of not only repelling kind of what Russia's been doing in cyberspace and on the ground as well, but what's critical nowadays is kind of what you call winning the information warfare space, which is essentially um, convincing the rest of the world to be on your side. And I think it's kind of a no-brainer with Ukraine, but they've also done a really good job. And this is kind of I would say the downfall of authoritarian governments like China and Russia is the fact that they're trying to keep it a secret from their local population. And so most
Mm.
local Russians had no idea that this was going on. And you keep hearing these news stories about these captured Russian soldiers who, are calling their moms or surrendering a free will because they're showing up thinking that they were there to kill the Nazis, that somehow
Mm.
Ukraine had become fascist and they were molesting kids and stuff like that, and that's kind of what the
Wow.
Russian army was like being told. And so these folks are brainwashed, essentially going over there thinking that they're doing the right thing, because I think at the end of the day everyone always thinks that from your perspective you're always the good guy.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's that realization of kind of like, are we the baddies, like at a certain point that they had where they're like, we just like massacred this village, what's going on with this? And
Mm-hmm.
people start questioning that. And so I think Ukraine did a really good job of kind of getting ahead of that, reaching out to the international community. What's disheartening is that we do need to come together. I think the EU and the US to kind of be able to stop this, but essentially Putin thought this was going to be over in under a week, and just didn't plan well, had some bad intelligence, and just kind of maybe didn't expect the type of resistance that Ukraine has put up. But they are kind of setting the standard for how to repel a much larger invader,
Mm.
how to handle themselves in cyberspace, how to appeal for help from the global community. And it sets up some really interesting stuff. I think a lot of people make parallels to what's happening in Ukraine, and will this happen to Taiwan in the next few years? And
Mm.
the answer is that it's not a one-to-one comparison. You can't. It's apples to oranges type of a thing. It's a
Mm-hmm.
totally different scenario, different area of the world. But you can bet, and I've studied Chinese hackers for quite a bit of time, so they're already starting to prepare for that point when that would happen in Taiwan. So a lot of my folks that work the Russia side that are my close friends, we're all paying very close attention to see how Ukraine, handles this, how Russia's strategy shifts in all of this. But we're also keeping an eye on like, when is China going to make a move on Taiwan, because they have been taking copious notes, and they've kind of realized like, wow, yeah, if you really can't take your intended target in under a week, then the rest of the world starts to get wind and starts to raise funds and create Kickstarter campaigns and like all of these things. So they're kind of realizing like, noting Russia's mistakes and how to improve upon it in the future. And to me, that's the scariest part, is that Russia's really good at the disinformation type of stuff. So putting that propaganda out, we saw it in the 2016 election. I helped work that at my company CrowdStrike for quite some time, was catching the Russians intruding into the Democratic National Convention and leaking those emails, and then peppering that bit of truth in with the falsehoods to confuse everyone and kind of make all of that happen. But what's concerning is that Russia has had that playbook for many, many years at this point. And China is looking at the technological side. How can we get to the point where we can anticipate using AI and machine learning technology what riles up the American public? Will Smith memes were fucking everywhere, last week or the week before that. How do you use something topical like that and immediately turn it into some sort of propaganda that China can use to make us not trust government, make us not trust our own folks, and sow discord and divide? And that's kind of the goal of a lot of these folks, is to divide and conquer, that they know that we're all very different people. The US is an extremely diverse place with all sorts of different opinions. We have freedom of speech. That's one of the great things that we enjoy. They don't enjoy in their own country, but at the same time, like, how do you get to that point where you can combat that sort of disinformation? And so that's the challenge for myself and a lot of other folks in the future, is like, can we get to that point where you trust the information that you're hearing? So it's a long road ahead of us.
Yeah, we are right in the thick of it right now, for sure. That is the penultimate problem, or not penultimate, but that is the ultimate kind of like problem right here. It's almost impossible to find information you trust, at least 100% of the time, right? So
yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. I appreciate that. I'm just interested. I wonder what this impulse is. Is it the same impulse, or what is it going to take? To get us to unite. Not just as a parkour community against FIG, for example, but as and nations against Russia sometimes. But just is it going to take an alien invasion? People always speculate about that before we actually start fighting with each other. We'll see, I suppose.
I do think there's some truth in that, and that the fact that the more we remember that we're all human, and that shared human experience of we've all suffered in some way, and if you can just find that in a different person, remember that they've gone through something probably very similar to what has been the worst moment of your life. Everyone has that moment, and it's on a sliding scale of how terrible it is. But if you can find that in another person, then you can have some empathy and just kind of remember that we're all kind of the same. We all want the same thing at the end of the day, good family, safe roof over our head, food, and when we get to that point, hopefully we can remember more of that.
Hopefully. Yes. Alrighty. Well, thank you again, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you with you. And hopefully we can do it again soon whenever USPK or World Chase Tag or anything else has an announcement. You're always welcome to ping me up, and I'll reach out to you.
Thank you.
If you don't do that for too long, I suppose, and see what you're up to. But
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So thanks for having me.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Woo! That was it. I hope you guys dug it. Thanks again for appearing on the program, Kozy, and for everyone who listened. I said that right. Much love. We're headed soon. We got one more guest, but next week, and then we are headed out to that young United Kingdom. And I will see some of you there that might be listening. So much love to the community of Height Drop and the whole wide world, because like we just landed on, we're all the same, baby. Yeah. We all find it a little bit weird how long I'm going on this ender. You're going to have to get used to it because I'm still going. You guys know what to do. I don't believe in asking for subscriptions or likes or anything anymore. You just do it if you want to do it. if everyone was so dumb that they had to be told how to do it, then we need to just let that go. That's what I think. All right. You're crazy if you're down in this deep well with me, but I love you for it. Peace out. See you on the next episode. Thanks, everyone.